Hear you. All persons having anything to do for the Honorable David Lowy, Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting at Salem, within and for this county of Essex, draw near. Give your attendance and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This court is now in session. You may be seated.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. The court officers told me that you were all here at 20 of 9. Wow. I have a series of questions for all of you. If you can answer any of my questions, if yes, please raise your hand. Otherwise, there's no need to respond verbally to any of my questions. Any of the jurors have any difficulty following the instructions from the court not to discuss the case among yourselves or with anybody else? Any of the jurors have any difficulty following the instructions of the court not to do any independent investigation concerning this case and avoid any information from any source other than one in the courtroom? Is there any serious and substantial issue involving your jury duty that you need to alert the court to at this time? None of the jurors have answered affirmatively. If we could have the witness resume the stand. Thank you.
I'm afraid if I force it, it'll cut him off.
You can head right up to Dr.
Okay, good morning, Judge Dudley. You remain under oath. Thank you. Yes, please, Ms. McDougall.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Now, Doctor, on Friday, we were talking about some of the testing that was done of Philip Chism, understanding it wasn't any testing that you had ordered. Is that correct?
The testing we were talking about?
Well, you didn't order any testing, did you?
I did.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get to that. You certainly had an opportunity to review the DYS records. I believe you testified on direct, and all of the other records relevant to Philip Chism. Is that correct? That's
correct.
And in March of 2014, 5 months after Ms. Ritzer was murdered, Mr. Chism was given some IQ testing. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
And specifically, he was given, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, but the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 4th edition. Is that correct?
I don't remember specifically, but I know he was given a Wechsler.
Okay. One of the Wechslers, and it was and that's essentially, to the layperson, an IQ test, correct?
Essentially.
Okay. And that's a test, that's a cognitive measure. That's a test of cognition. Is that correct?
It's a test of intelligence.
Right. So it shouldn't change.
The Wechsler?
Right. Over the course of one's life, your intelligence doesn't change, does it?
No, but I'm not a psychologist, so I don't feel really expert on testifying on these tests.
Okay.
But
certainly you would agree with me that his testing on the Wechsler in March of 2014 across the board was either in the average or high average range.
That's correct.
Okay. But then in June of 2015, he was given an adult Wechsler. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And so now we're in June of 2015. We're some 18 months past the murder of Miss Ritzer. And we're 3 months...
Your Honor, the issue of whether it's a murder or not is up to the jury, not the Commonwealth.
I'll sustain the objection.
18 months after the defendant's arrest, in June of 2015, he was administered an adult Wechsler IQ test. Is that correct?
I know he was administered an adult IQ test.
And this is 3 months after you've begun meeting with him. in,
That would
or
be-
maybe
that-
4. So you said, I believe, February is when you start to...
I first met with him in March, I believe.
And on June 25th of 2015, when he's given the adult Wechsler, he scores below the first percentile. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So low that he wouldn't be functioning. Is that correct?
That I don't have an
Well, he's
opinion.
beneath 1% of the population
Yeah.
on the adult Wechsler.
I don't feel like that's an area that I should
Well, Doctor, absent catastrophic head injury the day before, do you have any explanation for why he would score less than 1% on a cognition test in June of 2015?
What I'm saying is that there's a variety of factors that impacts on a person's ability to perform on these tests. And I think that that's a question more appropriately put to a psychologist who actually administers the test.
Okay. But those factors that were present in June of 2015, according to you, weren't present in March of 2014, were they?
Objection.
Based on the last answer, I'll sustain the objection. As to the area of inquiry that you're pursuing, you can pursue it.
Let me ask you this, Doctor. Understanding you're not a psychologist, certainly psychiatrists use testing that is done by psychologists in their evaluation of someone, particularly in the forensic area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you at all consider this dramatic change in his testing in June of 2015?
Yes.
And how did you explain it?
I didn't explain it. You asked me, did I consider it? I
Okay.
considered it. It didn't change my opinion.
You considered it and rejected it, essentially.
No, I said it. I considered it, and it didn't change my opinion.
Well, Doctor, is there any testing prior to June of 2015 that you have reviewed that in any way supports your opinion that Mr. Chism was experiencing psychosis in October of 2013?
So could you?
Objection.
You need the question restated? Doctor?
Yes.
Is there any testing that you have reviewed prior to June of 2015 that supports your opinion that the defendant was experiencing psychosis in October of 2013?
Prior to June of 2015?
Yes.
No.
And you are aware that you, I believe, testified on direct on Friday that you reviewed testing done by Dr. Nancy Hebben for the presence of malingering. Is that correct?
I reviewed her test, yes.
And certainly nothing about her testing changed your opinion that Mr. Chism was experiencing psychosis on October 22nd of 2013.
That's correct.
And in fact, you didn't administer or request that any test be administered on the specific issue of malingering, did you?
No.
In fact, the only assessment you did of malingering was your own assessment in your interviews of Philip Chism.
My own assessment in my interviews of Mr. Chisholm, and as well as other sources of information that were available to me.
What other sources of information?
The interviews with his mother, the other interviews of other family members and people who knew him, the reports of the students, the things that we went over in direct.
So based on the reports of those students from the math class, Alexandria Starling, Caribbean, Rania Radui, the 2 soccer players, and you say the family from Tennessee, that's what, and Mrs. Chisholm, that's what corroborated your finding that Mr. Chisholm was not malingering?
That's what corroborated my finding that he was suffering from a psychotic disorder.
But you didn't really assess malingering, did you?
I assessed malingering as it related to the psychotic disorder.
Now, you made certain observations of the defendant when you were meeting him that you believed confirmed he was experiencing auditory hallucinations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you consider at all observations made by those contained in the records by those at times when Mr. Chisholm didn't realize anyone was observing him?
Yes.
And fair to say there were observations in the record that were not consistent with the idea that Mr. Chisholm was experiencing auditory hallucinations.
I would say that there were observations in the records in which there was no observation of him, or no observation that was understood to be one where he was experiencing auditory hallucinations.
Well, these were people who part of their job is that they unfortunately view people who are experiencing auditory hallucinations, correct?
I understand that.
Is that true? I know you understand it, but is that correct? That the people whose records you were reviewing are people who, in their day-to-day life, watch people who are hearing voices?
That I don't know.
And those people did not make any observations of Mr. Chism consistent with him hearing voices, did they?
I know there were reports in the records of those who felt that they did not observe him hearing voices.
And certainly when you were interviewing Mr. Chism, he knew you were looking at him.
Presumably.
Right. I mean, you're in a one-on-one situation, basically.
That's correct.
And in fact, with respect to Sarah Young, his ongoing counselor at DYS, you used your interview with her as part of, to sort of bolster your belief that Mr. Chism had experienced some kind of childhood trauma. Is that correct?
I reported that she had the same sense that there was a trauma history that she hadn't gotten at.
But there were a lot of things that Ms. Young told you that you didn't report, weren't there?
I'm not quite sure what you're referencing.
Okay. Well, certainly Ms. Young reported that while certainly Philip was often flat, there were other times when he smiled, he was exuberant, he engaged with people, including her, particularly in those first few months at DYS.
So you're asking me, did she tell me that?
Yeah.
I can't find my note. If she did, it's not included in my report.
Right. Well, the only thing you include in your report regarding the observations of Ms. Young is the things that bolstered your opinion about Mr. Chism having suffered a childhood trauma, correct?
Well, I didn't summarize any of her notes and things like that. I mean, I was responding really to my conversation with her. I mean, I'm sorry.
I apologize.
I mean, there's a lot in her notes. I mean, she writes notes over a period of her time with him, and she talks about different affects, different experiences.
Certainly, and she was seeing Philip Chism almost every day in November of 2013, December of 2013, January of 2014.
Correct.
And she never observed anything she believed was consistent with him hearing voices, did she?
I can't say that I remember all of those notes, but my memory is that her main impression was that he had trauma-related difficulties and not a psychotic process.
She didn't see any evidence of psychosis in November or December of 2013, did she?
What I'm saying is what I remember is that she did not believe he had a psychotic process.
He didn't have a psychotic process because he wasn't experiencing psychosis.
I'm telling you what I remember.
Okay. Now, you testified on direct that you believe the onset of this psychosis was when Mr. Chism was 10 years old. Is that correct?
Approximately.
And that is based on his report of when these voices started. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There's no other support for the notion that this psychosis, onset of this psychosis was 10 years old, is there?
That's correct.
And in fact, 10 would be a fairly rare young age for there to be an onset of psychosis, wouldn't it?
That's correct.
So rare that you might even report it to the NIH, is that correct?
No.
But very rare that psychosis would onset as early as 10.
Early onset is not the common age of onset. It's not. I wouldn't describe it in the way that you're describing it.
But the only support for the idea it started at 10 is because that's when Mr. Chism told you he started hearing these voices.
That's correct.
And you are aware, Dr. Dudley, that he has told other people that he started hearing these voices at other times. Is that correct?
Yes.
As young as 5 or 6, maybe even as young as 2. Is that correct?
I don't remember that.
Okay. And that would certainly be extremely rare, wouldn't it?
2 would be extremely rare.
Now, did you have further conversation with Mr. Chism regarding the nature of these voices?
Yes.
And that's, in addition to informing your opinion, it's also a way to check for malingering, isn't it?
Yes.
Because people who don't experience genuine psychosis sometimes have the wrong idea about how voices work, don't they?
Well, it's that, and as well as kind of other things that go along with it.
And how many voices did Mr. Chism report hearing?
He reported hearing a voice.
A voice, a single voice, is
Yes.
that correct? Was he able to identify that voice as male or female?
Eventually, male.
Did he report that that voice was external or internal, meaning that that voice was coming from inside his head or coming into his head from the outside?
He reported that he could hear it as clearly as he could hear my voice. At different times, trying to explain where it was and what the source of it was, he was all over the place with that.
A little bit what?
He was all over the place with that.
And in fact, once again, are you aware that Mr. Chism has made other statements regarding the number of voices, the quality of voices, and the gender of the voices he hears to other clinicians?
Yes.
Did that factor at all into your consideration?
Did I consider it?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Does it in any way change your belief that Mr. Chism is malingering or not malingering?
It doesn't change my opinion with regard to the psychotic process.
Okay. Now, I want to go back very briefly to the actual day of this event. You talked about Mr. Chism's exchange with Ramsey, his exchange with Mr. Hebert. With respect to, you're familiar with a young woman named Autumn Ciani, is that correct?
Yes. And the name?
If I told you she was the girl in the classroom, does that help?
That's correct. That helps. Thank you.
And certainly some of her observations you relied on in forming your opinion that she saw him, I think she said, talking to himself and looking out the window. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you consider at all the fact that she says immediately prior to Ms. Ritzer returning to the classroom, she had an exchange with Mr. Chism at the whiteboard where he spoke to her, made eye contact with her, wasn't mumbling, and wasn't appearing to have any difficulties speaking to her?
Did I consider that?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
But once again, it's fair to say that doesn't change your opinion that he was experiencing a psychotic process, correct?
That's correct.
Let me ask you about how long you believe that Mr. Chism was experiencing psychosis, non-specific psychosis at the time of the event. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, say that.
It was a bad question. You believe that Mr. Chism was experiencing psychosis at the time he killed Colleen Ritzer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How long do you believe that psychosis lasted?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Well, has Mr. Chism been in the throes of psychosis ever since?
It's my opinion that he's been experiencing a psychotic process ever since. The intensity of the voices and the difficulties that he has with it is what ebbs and flows. And
when it ebbs, he is capable of a fair amount of lucidity. Is that correct?
Say that once more.
Does he have lucid periods? Does he have lucid intervals?
He has lucid intervals, but he's also, I mean, it doesn't affect his intelligence. And so it kind of depends on what's going on. I mean, it's not like he can't be lucid and psychotic at the same time.
And in fact, he attended school regularly when he first arrived at DYS. He was functioning with his peers in a relatively normal way. He was managing day to day. Is that correct?
When he first came to DYS?
Yeah.
More or less.
And you indicated that the psychosis doesn't affect his intelligence. Does it affect his capacity for empathy?
It depends on what's... Let me put it this way. There's a variety of variables. One is, what's the intensity of the voice at any particular point in time, whether it's so intense that it's commanding, at a level of commanding where he has to respond to it, as opposed to whether it's more quiescent where he can ignore it. It's going to depend on the content of what the voices are saying. And so that it goes directly also to your question as to what the content of the voices are saying will affect how he's feeling in a variety of ways, including empathy.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Dudley, stepping away from Mr. Chism for a moment.
Okay.
A person who's experiencing acute psychosis who commits a violent crime, would you expect them at some point afterwards, when they are medicated or lucid for whatever reason, to be hit with the reality of what they did in the throes of their psychosis?
Certainly after they're medicated, yeah.
And you would expect them then to be profoundly remorseful, wouldn't you?
They could be profoundly remorseful, they could be profoundly confused, there could be a whole bunch of different sorts of feelings, which relate not only to the treatment of the psychosis, but also relate to just other factors.
I'm having trouble hearing Dr. Dudley.
Could you just project your voice, if you could, please, Doctor?
I'll try.
Well, at no point in any of your meetings with Philip Chism has he experienced any...
I think I know what the question is, and I'll allow it as relates to the words used or the observation.
You talked to him at least somewhat about the events of October 22nd, 2013, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
And without getting into the details, does he...
Maybe heard it sideways?
Sure.
Dr. Dudley, last week you indicated that you've met with Philip Chism starting in, I believe, March of 2015 and as recently as last week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
At any time during any of your meetings with Mr. Chism, has he expressed to you remorse or empathy regarding the events of October 22nd?
Objection.
Yes.
When was that?
The last time I saw him. Not the last time I saw him. In September.
That was remorse that he hadn't been more effective in ignoring the voices. Is that correct?
He talked about a variety of things, not really understanding that the voices were an illness, not being able to manage it, being helpless in response to the voices. He talked about a variety of things, and that, and how that resulted in behaviors that were really not him. Then when I saw him this last time, which was last Thursday, there was much more of a sense of having had an illness that had not been treated, and had that been treated, he wouldn't have caused the difficulties that he's caused.
Caused the difficulties that he's caused?
Yes.
Dr. Dudley?
To this family.
If he hadn't listened to the voices, he wouldn't have caused the difficulties that he caused to his family?
No, to the victim's family.
Well, that's not what you said, is it?
I said to this family.
And is that how he described them, difficulties, Dr. Dudley?
I think it's pretty hard for him to talk about this.
Dr. Dudley, in your evaluation of the events of October 22nd, 2013, did you consider at all the sexual aspects?
Yes, I did.
And how did you consider them? Because they don't really appear at all in your report, do they?
I was left with some questions.
Because you didn't find any answers in anything you reviewed, did you?
I didn't find an answer that I felt that I could opine on with a reasonable. I think, as I mentioned on Friday, it's clear to me that he has, in addition to these psychotic symptoms, pretty clear trauma-related symptoms of trauma-related difficulties, and so, of course, I have suspicions about that, but I was never able to really get a clear handle on the underlying traumas. That I felt like I could opine on them with certainty.
Well, certainly the sexual violence inherent in what he did to Colleen Ritzer is not accounted for entirely by this psychosis, is it?
That's correct.
And so you then decided that if he had experienced similar trauma in childhood himself, that would help explain the entire behavior, is that correct?
No. Let's see how. It's not uncommon for people's experiences to get incorporated into the content of a psychotic process. And so while I believe that that it was ultimately mediated through the psychotic process, the content of it, I believe, was probably also informed by other experiences.
But Mr. Chism adamantly denied to you any history of sexual abuse, didn't he?
He denied any history of abuse, neglect, difficulties, and at some, but that when questioned about the symptoms that he was exhibiting of trauma-related difficulties, then he would say, "I won't talk about it."
I won't talk about it.
I can't talk about it.
I
won't
can't
talk.
talk.
I mean, he said different things that, sometimes he would say, I can't talk about it. Sometimes he would say, I won't talk about it.
But when
Sometimes he
asked-
would say, I'm being told not to talk about it. So it was different things. But the bottom line is, he didn't talk about it.
And when asked explicitly, he denied physical or sexual abuse as a child, didn't he?
That's correct.
To you and to everyone else in the records,
That's
correct?
correct.
And in fact, his mother denies physical or sexual abuse of Philip. Is that correct?
I mean, that she ever sexually or physically abused him?
Or observed anyone else doing it?
She certainly denied that she ever sexually or physically abused him. And she... I think she denied ever seeing anybody sexually or physically abuse him.
And let me ask you this. To the extent you have testified that you relied on your interview with Mrs. Chism, that would be your September 2015 interview, correct?
That's correct.
Did you consider at all her statement of October 23rd, 2013?
And to other evaluators?
To the police?
Oh, I'm sorry. 2013?
Yes.
Yes.
And did you consider at all any inconsistencies between those two reports
Yes.
in assessing Ms. Chisholm's credibility in relying on her interview?
Yes.
But it didn't change anything.
It didn't change my opinion as to whether he has a psychotic process.
Now, Doctor, ultimately, you produced, initially at least, an 11-page report in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the first, call it a page, a little more than a page, is just an introductory paragraph and then a listing of all the sources of information that you relied on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that would leave a balance of about a little less than 10 pages. Is that correct?
I guess, yes.
And approximately 8 to 9 pages of your report is dedicated to what Mr. Chism told you, isn't it?
That's correct.
Leaving a page of other sources. Facts are not my strong suit, Dr. Dudley, but about 90% of your report relies on the statements of Philip Chism. Is that correct?
Of the report?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and in fact, 80 to 90% of your opinion relies on Philip Chism, doesn't it?
I would say that my opinion, I mean, my examinations of him are an important part of my opinion. But I also believe that the other sources of information available to me were also important.
Well, let me ask you this, Doctor. You testified on Friday that whether he ever pretended to have difficulties he didn't have or manipulate staff, his psychiatric symptoms are credible. Is that correct? That was your testimony on Friday.
With regard to the psychotic process, yes.
Okay. And in fact, not only did you conclude that Philip Chism was malingering, you never even discussed malingering in your report, did you?
I don't believe so.
You never even raised the possibility that what he was telling you is either not true at all or exaggerated, did you?
In the report,
Yes.
Objection. May I be heard at sidebar?
Sure.
Dr. Dudley, you never, nothing in your report, and frankly nothing in your opinion, considered the possibility that Philip Chism isn't telling you the absolute truth about these voices, did it, and his other symptoms.
I considered that.
But you believe, based on your interactions with him, that he was being accurate, correct?
With regard to the psychotic process, yes.
Well, what do you mean by that? You keep saying that, doctor.
Exactly what I said. I mean, I'm not sure what your question is.
If he doesn't hear voices, if he's not hearing voices, does that change your opinion?
It's my opinion that he is hearing voices, and so that would make a difference, yes.
Right. Because if he's not hearing voices, then no one's telling him what to do on October 22nd of 2013, are they?
That's correct.
And if he's not hearing voices, then there is absolutely no explanation for his conduct on October 22nd of 2013, except that it was volitional. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that, but I would say that the fact that he's hearing voices is an important issue.
Well, is it your testimony that in the absence of these reported voices, you could find that he was experiencing psychosis on October 22nd of 2013, based on the other evidence that you have, other than him reporting hearing auditory hallucination?
I'm sorry, you lost me.
Fair enough, it was a long question. If Philip Chism doesn't hear voices, take that, I understand you believe that, but take that out of the equation. is there enough evidence to conclude that Philip Chism is experiencing psychosis in October of 2013?
No, I believe that the auditory hallucinations are a central feature.
The one male voice that he ultimately reported hearing to you?
Correct.
That he reported having heard since he was 10?
Correct.
Which is the basis for your opinion that this psychosis began at 10?
Correct.
If I could just have one moment, Your Honor.
Sure. You direct me, please?
Maybe see next sidebar, Your Honor.
Sure.
Good morning, Dr. Dudley.
Good morning.
Did you request testing?
Yes, I did.
What forms of testing did you request?
I requested a form of testing where there are scans of the brain to look for whether there are actual changes in the brain that are consistent with the diagnosis of a psychotic disorder.
And were those scans done?
Yes, they were.
And were they consistent with your opinion?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you consider them informing your opinion?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive the results of those scans before or after you wrote your main report?
After.
Now, on Friday, the prosecutor asked you some questions about an article you wrote about mitigation work in capital cases, correct?
That's correct.
And can you explain the difference between mitigation work and an evaluation for lack of criminal responsibility?
Yeah. When you're doing mitigation work, you're really doing an evaluation to present to the jury after they've already found a person guilty of a crime, and it's particularly done in capital litigation when the jury then has to make a decision as to whether the person should receive the death penalty or not. And so that the mental health information that the jury gets is for the purpose of helping them to decide whether this is a person who should get the death penalty or some other, like life in prison or some other sentence. And so you're really talking about helping them understand how the person got to where they are. When you're doing an evaluation in connection with an affirmative defense such as this, it's a much more rare, unusual sort of thing where you do a psychiatric evaluation and find that the person's mental illness is such that the question of their actual responsibility is going to be raised. And so it's a much more rare, I think in the course of my 30-some years, it's been a rare occurrence that issue of their actual criminal responsibility is that question, as opposed to mitigation where you're talking about, well, how bad is this? What kind of punishment should the person get? And it doesn't affect the fact that you've already found them guilty.
Now, Dr. Dudley, the prosecutor asked you some questions about recommendations that you made in this article about mitigation in capital cases. And she said that said something about you not advising not to do brain scans or psychological testing. Could you explain?
What we were as I indicated the other day when I was asked about this is the paper that was written to try to explain different standards that have been set for what makes a legal team's efforts to develop mitigation in these capital cases, because it was particularly about capital cases. What is the standard of practice? What is it that they're supposed to be doing? And what we were trying to argue against was that this is not a situation where an attorney should get together and just order everything, just indiscriminately order everything. That decisions about testing should be based on having done some work to see what kind of testing might be indicated, whether scans were indicated or not. Just so, because it just seemed that so many legal teams, in an attempt to respond to the standard of making sure they did mitigation, were just kind of indiscriminately doing everything without having given any thought. So it's not a testing should never be done sort of argument. It's that testing should be there should be a thoughtful decision about what you're going to do and what kinds of tests you're going to do, based on having done some work and knowing something about your client.
Now, how did you consider Philip Chism's ability on October 22nd to find a barrel, a large enough barrel, and successfully shoplift? How did that figure into your opinion?
I didn't believe that was inconsistent with the opinion that the driving force behind the killing was psychotic.
And why is that?
Because that mental health difficulty doesn't affect your capacity to do those other things.
Pardon me?
That mental health difficulty doesn't affect your capacity to do those other things.
Is that, you had talked on cross-examination about intellect and psychosis.
Correct.
Can you explain a little more about that?
Well, the point I was trying to make is that it doesn't make, having a psychotic process doesn't mean that you have an intellectual deficit. And so, you could be an intelligent person and still have a psychosis. At any given, might that affect? So, say for example, if you are at the moment, hearing auditory hallucinations that are so strong that you can't ignore them, that you have to respond to them, that they're at that level that we call command hallucinations. Okay, that may be sufficiently distracting that there would be certain things that you couldn't do at that moment, but it doesn't have an overall effect on your intellectual process. And when the intensity of that passes, you would be able to function intellectually.
So when someone is in the throes of command hallucinations, they may act in ways to perpetuate the command of the hallucination, correct?
Well, by definition, if it's a command hallucination, they act in ways that are responsive to those commands.
Now, Philip Chism, prior to entering the bathroom after Miss Ritzer, had in his possession a box cutter, gloves, and most likely a mask. Did you consider that in your opinion?
Yes.
And could you explain how that relates to your opinion?
It doesn't change my opinion with regard to a response to command hallucinations. Let me just restate the fact that the central issue in a psychotic process is that it's irrational.
Pardon me?
The central issue in a psychotic process is that it's irrational. So, I don't want to speculate a rational explanation for an irrational act.
Now, do people who are under the influence of command hallucinations at that level of psychosis, do they always appear psychotic?
What do you mean?
Would the people around them necessarily know that they were under the influence of command hallucinations?
Not necessarily.
Can you explain?
Well, the response, right? The mumbling that we've been talking about periodically, the attempt to respond to internal stimuli depends on how the person's reacting. So what I was describing during my interviews with him is that I would ask him a question, say the voice would tell him to respond or not respond, and he would be responding to the voice and then not responding to me. It could very well be that if the voices are so low that you don't have to respond, then you wouldn't be obviously responding to some sort of internal stimuli, or the voices can be so compelling and so strong that you're not challenging them, that you're not talking about, that you're not responding. So you're acting in response to those stimuli, but you're not trying to talk with it or argue with it or respond to it. Is that clear?
Yes. So now, the Commonwealth asked you about testimony in 3 high-publicity cases, correct? On
Well,
cross-examination?
they mentioned them. Yeah.
Pardon me?
They mentioned 3 cases.
Yes. And those were cases that had high publicity, correct?
Yes.
And have you testified in cases where there's been no publicity?
Yes. Yes.
And in the past 2 years, could you tell us what cases you've testified where there's been little publicity?
Probably not. I mean.
In what forums have you testified in the past 2 years?
Local, state, local courts. I do a lot of civil cases. They're not criminal cases at all that no one's particularly interested in. I've recently done several Hague Convention cases, which are kind of kept quiet.
What are Hague Convention cases?
I'll sustain the objection. The redirect, I think, makes the point. You can have further inquiry, though, as to the question. I'm not cutting off the list that you wanted to go through over the last 2 years.
Well, I object.
All right, I'll see counsel decide about it.
Now, Dr. Dudley, why would you want a brain scan study so long after the incident?
Well, can I have that question one more time? Why would you want to what?
Why would you want a brain scan done so long after the incident?
Are you talking about in mitigation cases or
In this case.
I'll sustain the objection. It goes beyond the point of the cross.
Did you request psychological testing?
No.
Why not?
In an adolescent who, in my opinion, was suffering from at least 2 major psychiatric difficulties, I wasn't certain that that was the best testing to go for.
Can you explain a little further?
Well, in the sense that it would give me some clear additional information.
You anticipated that the testing would be ambiguous?
Just the combination of trauma-related symptoms and psychotic symptoms might be ambiguous, and I simply chose an approach to testing that I thought would give me at least something more clear.
And why brain scans in particular?
Sustained. I'll put counsel to sidebar.
Now, you met with Philip Chism on December 3rd, 2015, correct?
That's correct.
And
Vernon, can we be seen? I apologize.
Sure.
now, Dr. Dudley, when you approach a evaluation on the issue of criminal responsibility, what role does assessing malingering play in your evaluation generally?
It's a required piece of the differential assessment.
And why is that?
Well, by definition, malingering is, as I indicated in the direct, pretending to be more ill than you really are, and in some cases even pretending to be more healthy than you really are, because of what we call secondary gain you can get out of that. And in any sort of legal proceeding where there would be an advantage to being ill, or an advantage to not being ill, one has to consider that that's going on.
And did you consider malingering over the course of your interviews with Mr. Chism?
Yes.
How did Mr. Chism's age figure into your assessment of him and your opinion?
Well, there's his age in actual chronological years, and then there's his age in the sense of his emotional maturity. So you know that he has an adolescent brain as opposed to an adult brain, and so that you have to consider that in how he's dealing, how he's handling things, the kind of immature capacity for decision making, etc., that would be part of the adolescent brain. And then you're considering the fact that emotionally he seems even less mature than his years, and so that goes into the mix of not only his history and how he's handled his history, but how he's handling his actual interaction with you.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Your Honor, we have the one remaining issue.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the morning recess early so I can discuss some issues of law with counsel, and the morning recess may take a little bit more than the normal time. Don't discuss the case among yourselves with anybody else during the recess. The first thing I'll do when you come back in the court is make sure you follow those instructions. Court will remain in session. Jurors are excused.
All right.
Actually, he stepped.
Did you want him to
This is on the issue of December 3rd, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, you can step down, Doctor. Thank you. Okay, so I'll hear from you, Ms. Regan, on this December 3rd interview, please.
Your Honor, the defendant wishes to put in information about the December 3rd interview only as far as Dr. Dudley's observations of improvements in Philip Chism's condition from the other times that he had seen him. Due to the risperidol, the antipsychotic medication. The Commonwealth opened the door to this when the Commonwealth inquired whether Philip Chism had refused the medication the last day at the hospital.
Last day at the hospital. On what day?
It would have been November 4th, I believe, was the day of discharge from the recent admission to Worcester Recovery Center. It also came up in the jury has already heard about the December 3rd interview because the Commonwealth asked broad questions concerning whether Mr. Chism had expressed remorse, and though this information is certainly relevant, it certainly is supportive of Dr. Dudley's opinion, but also it answers in relevance issues that have been raised by the Commonwealth in its cross of Dr. Jackson and Dr. Dudley. And I did not give notice to the Commonwealth on Friday before Dr. Dudley got on the stand. I did have Dr. Dudley write a report on Saturday, and I provided that late Saturday to the Commonwealth.
Okay. Well, but specifically, the first issue, the cross-examination, Commonwealth inquiring not refused risperidol on the last day at the hospital, November 4th, 2015. Keep in mind, we're in a state of mind more than 2 years after the incident that came into play because of Dr. Jackson's testimony about a state of mind at the same time as competency evaluations. And the argument from the defendant was, concerning the low bar to probative value, that would say something about a state of mind 2 years later. That's not a clear call to admit that evidence that the defendant requested, but considering the standard of relevance, I decided to allow it. So that's how we're in this position. Just keep that in mind. That's how we're in this position, because the state of mind that's pertinent in this case is not December 3rd, 2015, but October 22nd, 2013. So the Commonwealth inquired about the Risperdal at the last day of the hospital. As I understood the Commonwealth's purpose in that question, it was as it relates to malingering or not malingering issue, which was a pretty narrow issue. Am I correct in the reason for the cross-examination in that area?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the cross-examination had a sliver of relevance as it relates to the malingering. Now, as far as agreeing to take Risperdal on December 3rd, 2015, and actually before then, what the defendant is seeking to do is to not rebut that narrow cross-examination, but get a new opinion after the Commonwealth has rested. I mean, it's not difficult to understand what the new opinion is. The new opinion is, see how he acts with Risperdal, let's look back and see how he acted without it. It's not brain surgery to figure out that this is not to rebut one malingering question on cross-examination. So other than that, that's the relevance issue. As far as the December 3rd interview and the Commonwealth's ability to respond, in addition to countlessly citing the SJC's recent comment on expert testimony and disclosure in Case versus Lang, that I think says a lot, despite the issues in Commonwealth versus Handwright, and footnote 4 of Commonwealth versus Handwright. Putting all that aside, what we have here is not a rehabilitation issue, it's a new grounds of criminal lack of criminal responsibility. I mean, it's not, what's going on here is not to rehabilitate that one question on cross. What's going on here is we want a new opinion in. This new opinion, based on the testimony after the Commonwealth rested, is this. Look at him on Risperdal, comparing to when he wasn't on Risperdal. That's the purpose, not to rehabilitate something that happened on cross-examination. With that said, I'll hear from you, and then I'll hear from the Commonwealth.
Your Honor, what I would inform the court, we have records we intend to introduce that show that he has been taking Risperdal since November 4th, making it more relevant. And
well, there's cases that talk about somebody saying they heard voices 2 months after the incident isn't relevant. We're 2+ years out where you want to have a new opinion that says, look at him on Risperdal compared to him after Risperdal. That's, I mean, put aside for the moment, just drop for the moment the disclosure issues. Drop for the moment all the disclosure issues. The probative value of this is 2+ years out. So why don't you just put aside the disclosure issues of concern based on Case versus Lang, Commonwealth versus Handwright, and that the cross was limited to a very narrow point. Just talk about the relevance issue in case I've misstated it.
well, Your Honor, any mental health evaluation is in this circumstance is retrospective. The Commonwealth is going to put in evidence of psychological testing. It's not psychological testing how Philip Chism was in 2013. It's psychological testing of how he was in 2015. And then their expert is going to make the connection. Everything is retrospective, but the fact that Dr. Dudley has an opinion that he has had a long-standing psychotic disorder and now has finally been given medication and has responded as you would expect someone on who has psychosis to respond, is certainly relevant. It's as relevant as what the Commonwealth is going to offer. And the Commonwealth, in asking the question, did he refuse the medication on the last day, did open the door to the inference that he didn't need the medication and he wasn't taking it and he just took it at the hospital to put on a show or something. And Dr. Dudley's observations of the changes in him and the positive effect that the medication has had would be highly relevant to refute the inference the Commonwealth has created with its questions.
I didn't take the cross for that purpose, but let me hear from you, Ms. McDougall.
It wasn't for that purpose, Your Honor. It was simply to show that the day before he was going back to court to be evaluated for competency, he purposefully declined the medication in order to make his symptoms look worse before he came back to court.
Well, that was my understanding, the purpose of the cross.
Your Honor, I don't want to spend very long on the disclosure issue, but I do want to at least touch on it because I think the Commonwealth has been put in a really untenable position on a variety of disclosure issues, as was discussed at sidebar, because absolutely nothing in the discovery gave the Commonwealth notice that Dr. Dudley had ordered the brain scans. I never would have asked those questions but for that. Additionally, the notice I was finally given on Saturday regarding the December 3rd meeting says absolutely nothing about Mr. Chism feeling any appreciation for the difficulties he's put the family through. I wouldn't have asked that question. I didn't follow up and cross-examine because I didn't want to open the door to this interview, which I had only just been given on Saturday in the middle of my cross-examination. So the Commonwealth has already been badly hamstrung by these disclosures. It's not just a matter of me standing up here and complaining because stuff's been filing late. This is a situation where this whole issue of the risperidol from the beginning has been a problem. Had I known that Ms. Regan was going to reference as an opening, we could have litigated that. Instead, she said it in opening and I was stuck with it. And then we have Dr. Jackson on and I had to ask for a voir dire to make sure that that wasn't going to open more doors. And then all of a sudden on direct for the first time on Friday, I learned that on a day when Mr. Chism waived his appearance to be in court when we argued the Dober-Lanigan, clearly it was a planned meeting between him and Mr. Dudley, and I learned about it during the direct. So the Commonwealth has been incredibly hamstrung, and at this point it would be incredibly prejudicial to the Commonwealth. Frankly, I've already gone places I wouldn't have gone in reliance on materials that aren't reliable.
Well, first of all, there's a serious probative value issue. There was a case I read just over the weekend where Judge Welch excluded evidence of a defendant saying he heard voices to certain people months, maybe even weeks after the incident that was excluded. And not only is it the hearsay issue looking backwards as to state of mind, but it's a probative value issue. If there is a probative value, to the defendant's medicated state 2+ years after the incident, and that is a huge if, which I, even with the low standard of probative value, have serious concerns that it has been satisfied. It is substantially outweighed by the unfair prejudice as it relates to all too many issues, and the court is not going to waste time repeating what I already said. So I seriously question any probative value to it. If there is probative value to it, it is extremely minimal and needs an opportunity to be litigated after disclosure as to whether or not the court is going to allow that in as a basis for the opinion. I mean, the language, the vigor, the seriousness, the shout across the bow language of the court in Case versus Lane could not be clearer. The concerns that led to footnote 4 of handwriting, to the whole concept of handwriting, the proposals before the SJC could not have been clearer. The December 3rd interview is not admitted for two reasons. One, it is of extremely limited probative value as it relates to October 22nd, 2013. And two, if there is any probative value to it, substantially outweighed by the danger of undue prejudice for the reasons outlined by the court and referenced in more detail than the court really appreciated in the Commonwealth's argument. All right, let's take the morning recess. Your objection is noted, and we'll reconvene. If everyone's ready, we'll reconvene a little bit before 11. Okay, next witness, please, Ms. Regan.
The defense has called Dr. Dvir.
Doctor, you're going to follow me?
Doctor, if I could ask you to stop here and turn face the clerk, she'll swear you in.
Right here.
No,
Would you
right there.
stop right there? Just raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated.
Doctor, make yourself comfortable. Before we begin, could you face this? You may be seated. And face it on the appropriate name. Good morning, Doctor. In a motion to sequester witnesses in the case, all that means is until the evidence is over, you can only be in the courtroom when you're testifying. You can't talk about your testimony to the other witnesses, or let them talk about theirs. Thank you. Ms. Regan, please.
Dr. Dvir, could you state your first and last name and spell them, please?
My first name is Yael, that's Y-A-E-L. My last name is Dvir, that's D-V-I-R.
And are you a doctor?
Yes, I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, an MD.
And are you licensed to practice medicine in Massachusetts?
I am.
Now, do you have board certifications?
Yes, I'm double boarded in general psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry.
And what's your current employment?
I'm an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where I direct the Mood and Psychotic Disorders Clinic at the Center for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders. And I also am a teaching faculty at the University Medical School.
Now, can you tell us about the clinic that you're a director of?
It is a consultation clinic that does consultations and evaluations on complex youth, where the question of major mental illnesses, mood disorders, and psychotic illnesses is in question. I usually see youth 2 to 3 times in consultation. I've started doing this work with Dr. Frazier, who's the Division Chief of Child Psychiatry at UMass.
Now, you have never met Philip Chism, correct?
Correct.
And you have no opinion about Philip Chism's mental health, correct?
Correct.
And it's your understanding your testimony here today is just in a general sense, correct?
Correct.
Now, where did you go to medical school?
I went to medical school at Hadassah Medical School, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, Israel.
Now, where did you do your residence?
I did my residency and my child and adolescent fellowship at the University of Massachusetts.
And you finished your fellowship in about 2009?
Yes.
Now, do you belong to professional organizations?
I do.
And could you tell us the professional organizations you belong to? Some of them anyway.
I belong to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the New I'm trying to remember the acronym there. It's the New England branch of ACAP. I belong to the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. ADAMSEP, which is the Association of Directors in Medical Student Education. I've been a member of a few other organizations in the past, but not currently.
Are you the editor of any peer-reviewed journals?
I co-edited an issue of Child and Adolescent Clinics of North America on psychosis in youth in 2013, and I am a peer reviewer for other journals.
And those include Academic Psychiatry, Harvard Review of Psychiatry.
Yes.
Now, you teach?
I do. I direct the medical student clerkship, which is the third-year course for medical students, and I also teach in the Child and Adolescent Fellowship.
And have you actually had peer review publications yourself?
I do.
And could you tell us some of those publications?
So in the issue that I described, I had 2 articles that I wrote myself. I had other publications related to mood disorders and trauma, other related to co-occurring autism spectrum disorders and psychosis.
Have you written chapters in books?
I have.
And could you tell us what chapters in books you've written?
This is a number of years back. I'm trying to remember the title of the textbook. It was a 3-volume series on psychosis and schizophrenia in general.
Was it a handbook of schizophrenia spectrum disorders?
Yes, yes.
And you wrote 2 chapters?
Yes, I co-wrote 2 chapters, one on early onset schizophrenia and one on the treatment of that condition.
Now, could you tell us what psychosis is?
Psychosis is a syndrome, meaning that it's a constellation of symptoms that come together. You can divide it into looking at the positive symptoms, which include hallucinations, which are sensory experiences that are not actually occurring for every other person in the world. Delusions, which are thoughts that do not have base in reality, and disorganized thinking or speech. There are also negative symptoms, which include decreased functioning and decreased social functioning in general.
Now, does psychosis occur in children?
Psychosis does occur in children.
And can you explain?
So psychosis is a syndrome, a set of symptoms, and it can be part of a number of disorders and diagnoses. It is not uncommon in very young children and can be actually part of normal development up to about the age of 6. However, after that age, those experiences are generally not part of normal development. And in school age, those symptoms usually are a sign of a more significant mental illness. Psychosis in children is more commonly part of more common conditions, such as mood disorders, can be a result of anxiety disorders, can be comorbid or co-occurring with either trauma-related illnesses or developmental issues like autism spectrum disorder. However, in childhood, psychotic illnesses that are a primary psychotic process still occur. In childhood, meaning before puberty, under the age of 13. They're quite rare, but they do occur. Estimated about 1 in 10,000. And after the age of 13, they're much more common, about 0.5%. And we know that for actually about half of adults who end up with a diagnosis of a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, those symptoms began in adolescence. And so the usual age of onset of those illnesses, of schizophrenia spectrum illnesses, is in later adolescence toward the mid-20s and 30s. But while rare, they do occur in childhood. They can be much more complicated to diagnose and to treat in childhood. Kids are complicated. Their language is still developing. All those things have to be taken into consideration when assessing a child.
Now, what is psychotic disorder not otherwise specified? Does it have a new name?
Psychotic disorder not otherwise specified is the term used in the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 4, and that was replaced in 2013 by DSM-5, which is the newer version. And Psychosis NOS now has a longer name, and I'm not sure I think it's schizophrenia spectrum disorder and psychosis not otherwise specified, or something of that effect. But what's important is this is there to be able to capture significant psychosis where some of the criteria necessary to actually make the diagnosis of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder are unavailable to the evaluator, or some of the details are missing.
Now, is this diagnosis useful in evaluating children and young teens?
It is very useful, and it is frequently used. Given the complexity of assessment and diagnosis in youth, frequently mental health professionals do not use a more specified diagnosis because things are still evolving and symptoms might be changing. And it is a way to mark that there is a significant concern leaning towards this area, but not all of the information is available, either because it wasn't being collected or because it hasn't occurred yet.
Now, does a psychotic disorder not otherwise specified, or rather an unspecified schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorder, how is that related to actual early onset schizophrenia?
I would say that in many cases where eventually a youth or young adult are diagnosed with schizophrenia or schizophrenia spectrum disorder, sometime in the years before that diagnosis was made, the diagnosis that they carried was psychosis NOS.
What is schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia is a chronic brain illness. So it's a biological illness. And if you use the DSM definitions for schizophrenia, there is a list of symptoms that have to be present, and there is a timeline that those symptoms have to be present. And it is an illness that is characterized by episodes of more acute psychosis and then impairment that occurs between those episodes.
Do all individuals with schizophrenia appear alike?
No, it's quite a heterogeneous group of disorders, and we see a variety of presentations.
And in people that are eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia, At what approximate what age do the psychotic symptoms first appear?
So the majority of people are diagnosed between late teens and early adulthood into the mid-20s. They initially have a prodromal phase that can last a number of years, where they have symptoms that are non-specific symptoms, and there can be general deterioration in their functioning or social functioning. Those young people tend to isolate themselves. There might be a significant decline in school function on top of the socializing functioning, and then other things that might continue to happen are irritability, odd or unusual behaviors, and only later on there may be additional delusional thinking.
Now, what is early onset schizophrenia?
Early onset schizophrenia is defined as the onset of schizophrenia before the age of 18 and after the age of 13.
And do you see cases of early onset schizophrenia in your clinic?
I do.
Now, what is very early onset schizophrenia?
Very early onset schizophrenia is the onset of schizophrenia before the age of 13, before puberty.
And do you see cases of that in your clinic?
I do.
But not often?
It's quite a rare condition.
Now, can hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thoughts occur in healthy children?
As I said, hallucinations can occur in healthy children without any illness before the age of 6. After the age of 6, that is not usually part of a normal development. It can be part of other biological brain conditions. It can be part of other mental health diagnoses, such as depression. Delusions do not occur in healthy children at all, and can occur in children with psychosis, whether it's related to affective illnesses such as bipolar disorder and depression, or in kids who later on develop schizophrenia.
Now, how does psychosis present itself in children under 13 and under?
The onset of very early onset schizophrenia or childhood onset schizophrenia is an insidious onset, meaning that the impairments are slow to progress and frequently are not recognized by the adult in the child's life until much time has passed. It is likely a more homogeneous type of illness compared to the the later onset of illness. Those children, because of where they are developmentally, tend to have much less complex delusions that are much less developed than those that you would see in older people with the same illness. They have hallucinations. Auditory hallucinations are the most common, but in young children before 13, they can also have visual and tactile and many other forms of hallucinations. There are some kids, but not all of the kids, that have premorbid developmental problems, but that is not the case in all of those youth.
Now, you had talked about positive and negative symptoms as concerns schizophrenia and schizophrenia spectrum diseases. Can you explain what the positive symptoms are?
Positive symptoms are the hallucinations, the delusions, and the disorganized speech and thinking.
And the negative symptoms?
And the negative symptoms are decreased functioning, decreased socializing, and just decreased ability to function within the social and academic demands.
How does psychosis present itself in children 13 and over?
It's much more similar to the adult illness of schizophrenia or adult psychoses. Many times the content is directly related to the adolescent's life. And so there are more auditory hallucinations compared to a variety, and there are more delusions, although depending on where the child is developmentally, these might also be less complex.
Now, we've used age 13 as a cutoff. Is that a gradual cutoff, or is that an abrupt cutoff in what you see?
It is not an abrupt cutoff, and it's just an agreed-upon marker of puberty, which is a process that involves brain changes and hormonal changes in the body causing brain changes. But it also can be a time that causes change in presentation for people who were starting to exhibit symptoms before 13.
Now, how do you go about evaluating whether a child or young teen suffers from a psychotic disorder and or schizophrenia?
So an interview with the youth and with the family is the most important part of the assessment. It is important to review as many records as possible, get collateral information from teachers and anybody else who has known this youth. Usually it is also helpful to do a medical workup and rule out a number of potential medical conditions that could also present themselves with psychosis. You can use psychological testing to help, but that's not diagnostic.
Now, do you consider family history?
Yes, family history is part of the general history that has to be evaluated, and it's an important factor.
Now, can you explain further what you look for in a family mental health history?
So we know that family history of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder is more common in children with childhood onset schizophrenia. It's also more common in youth with early onset schizophrenia.
And other psychotic disorders?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned psychological tests. Can you, do you use psychological tests when you are evaluating a child?
So I do not perform neuropsychological or psychological testing in youth. That is not part of my training. That's a neuropsychologist's job, but I do read the assessments and look for clues there. Important is to look at the general intellectual abilities of the youth, and to look at any language dysfunction to see if that can possibly explain some of the conditions. Some people use projective testing, which can sometimes elicit some of the psychotic symptoms, especially if the youth is not sharing those with his environment. But that is not, if that does not exist in the testing, that does not mean that schizophrenia can't be a diagnosis. It really is just one other tool and clue.
What is the course of schizophrenia in children and young teens?
So schizophrenia in general is a chronic illness, and it has acute exacerbations, and between those there can be a return to some level of stability. Usually every exacerbation leads to a general decline in the youth's, in any patient's function. Sadly, schizophrenia in children and in adolescents is a more severe form of the illness, so generally the course is more severe. They tend to have a general lower function even between those acute episodes.
Is that always the case?
It's not always the case. There can be young people who are able to continue with studies and able to continue in achieving high school diploma, going on to college. So there is a big variation of what people are able to do. The pre-morbid intelligence is usually something that you can look at. So if a young person starts with a higher intellectual ability, they tend to function better in between the episodes compared to somebody who starts already having some deficits.
Now, what is an acute I can't say it. What's an acute episode?
An acute episode. So it is mostly a significant increase in the positive symptoms, so in the hallucinations, the delusions, and the disorganization. So to some degree, those can still remain at the baseline level of function between the episodes, but during the period of the exacerbation or the acute episode, there is an increase in those symptoms.
How long can children or young teens have the illness before an acute episode?
It can be years.
And what can bring on an acute episode?
Nothing at all. An acute stress can definitely do that as well. We know that in adults, things like immigration increase the risk. We know that in transition age youth, that is, older teens and young 20s, transitioning into college can cause what we call first episode psychosis or first break. And in younger kids, any major life transition can definitely be a stressor that can kind of push that youth over the edge.
How does a child or young teen appear to others when they're in an acute episode?
Bizarre, out of control, not making sense.
Does an acute episode come on suddenly or gradually?
There is a gradual increase in positive symptoms, but sometimes at some point over the course of a couple of days there can be a significant increase or some kind of event that actually brings the youth into care.
When a child or young teen is entering an acute episode, can the negative symptoms increase as well?
They can. The negative symptoms are a lot easier for the surrounding people to ignore, and the positive symptoms really are quite pronounced, and so usually what the surrounding adults will notice are the positive symptoms, but generally all of the symptoms worsen.
Why are the negative symptoms easier for adults to ignore?
Well, they look like many other things. Because of the time that this usually happens, it could just look like a teenager spending more time in his room or having a difficult transition to high school and not being able to find friends. There might be suspicion that they started using substances and that's what's causing their change in behavior. The other thing is those are not necessarily symptoms that a youth shares with adults around them. So it's very hard for adults to understand what's the internal experience for the child. In general, adults are much better at noticing disruptive behaviors rather than internal experiences. You don't know if you don't ask and if you don't hear it from the youth.
Now, do these acute episodes end gradually or suddenly?
So in the majority of cases, an acute episode is such a severe and significant event that at that point the youth is brought into treatment. Because the youth is brought into treatment, usually if they respond to treatment, there is improvement in some of those symptoms. Youth can have can be quite guarded about some of their symptoms, and after sort of a short burst of things that the environment can see, can go back to not sharing and holding on to the experience.
How long does an acute episode last?
An acute episode can last anything between hours to days to weeks.
Now, how long do children and young teens suffer with the illness before adults around them notice?
Sustained cause for speculation, state of mind of a third person.
How long can children or young teens suffer with the symptoms of this disease before it comes to the attention of the adults in their lives?
Sustained. How long could this be going on before it would manifest itself?
It could be years.
Thank you. How do children and young teens experience this illness?
They generally are not aware that something unusual is happening to them, but it can be a scary experience, and they might be afraid to share it with people around them.
And how do children and young teens manage their illness? What means do they use to cope?
So some youth are much better than other youth in being able to manage symptoms and actually continue to function. Kids can use distraction. Some youth use headphones and music to quiet down voices if that's part of their experience. Some keep themselves very busy.
Now, when you diagnose psychoses in a child, do you report it to the National Institute of Health?
No.
Now, are the brains of children and young teens with schizophrenia likely to be different from those without it?
So this is a research question. So there is research, there is neuroimaging research in youth with schizophrenia and in adults with schizophrenia. And in general, what we know is that they're...
Sustained.
May be heard at sidebar?
Sure.
If I could have a minute, Your Honor.
Sure.
Has research shown that the brains of people with schizophrenia are different?
Objection.
Sustained.
Is schizophrenia a physical illness as well as a mental illness?
Schizophrenia is a brain illness. It manifests itself in behavior, but it is a brain illness.
Are there physical manifestations of schizophrenia in the brain?
Objection.
Sustained based on the court's previous rulings,
May I
not
have
on the qualifications.
May I have a moment?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dvir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dvir. Dr. Dvir, when you talk about this acute stage of the illness, is that something that could go on with for years without a... Let me start all over. If a child had reached the point where they were having the acute stage of the illness, is that something you would expect a caretaker for miss over a period of years, or do you just mean the sort of lead-up symptoms?
Lead-up symptoms, the prodromal phase is easily missed. A child can also go on to have quiet hallucinations and delusions for quite a long time. Usually when the hallucinations and delusions significantly increase and there is also an addition of disorganized speech pattern or behavior, usually people around notice. It depends on the state of the adults in the child's life and how attuned they are to what is going on for them. At that point, I would imagine that teachers or adults that come in close contact would notice that there is something that isn't right.
And there's nothing about this acute stage where you have auditory hallucinations that are really becoming disruptive for the individual that necessarily involves violence. Is that fair to say?
It does not necessarily involve violence, no.
And let me just ask you to assist us a little bit in just defining, there's a difference between schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Can you just explain what each thing is, please?
Schizoaffective disorder, or maybe I should start with what schizophrenia is. So schizophrenia is an illness where there are positive symptoms and negative symptoms. The positive symptoms that person has to have are at least one of the three following: hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized thoughts. Disorganized behavior is another symptom. These should be occurring for about a month, or if they're less than a month, require acute treatment, and there is about a 6-month period of negative symptoms, which is the general decline in function. Schizoaffective disorder is where there are also mood episodes that are part of the person's illness, and this can be schizoaffective disorder, depressive type or bipolar type. So it's almost like there is one on top of the other. And for a diagnosis of major depressive episodes, there need to be a certain amount of depressive symptoms in a certain period of time. For a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, there is depressive episodes and manic episodes. Schizoaffective disorder is an illness where in between those mood episodes, there still is psychosis. So whereas major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder are both episodic illnesses with a return to baseline without psychotic symptoms, in schizoaffective disorder there is also a period of time in between them where there are psychotic symptoms. That's because in major depressive disorder and in bipolar disorder, psychotic illnesses can occur as part of the mood episode.
Okay. And you've talked some about, let me ask you this. There's been a lot of research into people who are ultimately diagnosed as adults with schizophrenia, and then looking back to see if we can look for any sort of predictives about who's likely to become schizophrenic. Is that correct?
There is research into that.
And then by the same token, then there are attempts, so obviously the effort is to catch someone who's going to develop full-blown schizophrenia as early as possible, to get them treated as early as possible, ideally before they go off to college and have their first break. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say.
But one of the challenges is that while you can look at schizophrenics and look back and see that a very high percentage of them have a certain series of symptoms that lead up to their diagnosis. Those same symptoms aren't as predictive of schizophrenia. Does that make sense?
You're talking about the prodromal phase.
Yes.
And youth that are at risk of developing schizophrenia.
So I'm just going to
hindsight-
stop you for 1 second and have you define the prodromal phase for the jury.
Okay. So what I was going to say, a prodromal phase by name is something that you can really only accurately diagnose in retrospect, looking back and saying this is where this is going. But there is also another term that we use, which is sort of at-risk state, where there are several warning signs and reasons to be more concerned about the direction that this youth might be going into.
And disagree with me if this is your area of expertise. But one of the difficulties in this research, in the effort to look forward, to catch kids at the front end, is that there are kids who have that sort of warning phase symptoms who never develop schizophrenia.
Yes, there are kids that have those warning signs that don't develop schizophrenia. The majority of them do end up having significant mental health concerns.
Okay. But not necessarily schizophrenia.
Not necessarily schizophrenia, sometimes schizoaffective, sometimes other mood disorders.
And what's included in the early warning phase? What kinds of symptoms are you looking for?
There is a progression of the whole phase, and I would say that the phase of illness where you have quite nonspecific symptoms such as social withdrawal and decreased functioning and irritability and maybe things that look like increased anxiety and depression and maybe more involvement with substance use are less specific and can be part of many other things. When youth start to develop unusual thinking, that is, even when it's not a full-blown psychotic break, that is more leaning towards a schizophrenia illness in the future.
And what do you characterize as, I'm sorry, I don't want to miss you, what word did you just use for the thinking? Abnormal thinking, is that what you said?
Possibly. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Well, in terms of the additional symptom that sort of starts to carry us from non-specific symptoms that could take place in a number of situations more into the likelihood of developing a major mental illness, how do you characterize that kind of thinking? What would it involve?
So this is challenging, right? Because you can only do this with somebody who comes forward and says something's not right, or their environment says something's not right. It's impossible to characterize abnormal thinking in somebody that hasn't been identified as having a problem. So I think that really changes how we see things. But unusual ideas, beliefs that don't make sense, intense beliefs in areas that are not part of somebody's cultural or religious background, just bizarre thoughts.
Thoughts that if a child is able to express them to someone, and I understand they often aren't, at a minimum it would give someone pause to think, is this normal childhood fantasy or is this a problem?
Is this normal child fantasy, or later on in adolescence, is this some kind of existential thinking, or can I not follow the logic of this?
And you talked about that you can get also, in addition to sort of hallucinations and delusions and decreased functioning, you can get disorganization in thought or speech in a child who's sort of further along that spectrum, heading towards likely having a major mental illness.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And is there something called word salad that's used?
That is a term in mental status exam.
What
describes
is word salad?
That is speech that the words do not actually connect to each other and doesn't convey a message.
And once a child is in an acute stage that you've described may well lead to hospitalization or treatment,
Yeah.
would you expect the child to be able to interact normally with someone during that phase?
So just word salad is quite
I'm sorry,
in advance.
forget about word salad.
So,
I've moved on. I'm not trying to confuse you.
An interaction with a child who is having acute symptoms of psychosis can be challenging, but it can happen. It is possible to interact. With a youth, there are also youth that are quite guarded and will not share any of this and can, for briefer periods of time in a conversation, able to suppress and sort of withhold exhibiting any of those symptoms. So it is possible.
Even a child who is having command hallucinations that have reached a stage they can't not do what the command hallucinations tell them to do?
So sometimes they can, for 20, 30 minutes, a lot of people even that are experiencing pretty acute symptoms can seem fairly normal in an interaction with another person. If you let more time pass, usually something will come out, but it is possible, even when somebody is having command auditory hallucinations, not to let anybody know.
For 20 or 30 minutes, and then it gets less over time. Is that correct?
Yes.
They can only keep sort of the reaction at bay for a limited period of time.
Well, I would say that if you're sitting and interviewing somebody, if I would be sitting and interviewing a youth who is having command auditory hallucinations, I would expect that after 30 minutes, more of it will probably seep into the conversation. But in a natural environment where a kid could go to the other room, plug in his iPod and listen to some music, he might be able to do some things that would mask what is going on.
And Dr. Dvir, just to be clear, you've never met Philip Chism.
I've never met him.
You've never treated Philip Chism.
I've never treated him.
Everything you've testified today is just based on your training and experience and completely unrelated to Philip Chism.
Yes.
I have nothing further.
I have no questions.
All right. Thank you, Doctor.
I just need one moment. Thank
Sure.
you, Dr. Dvir.
May we approach sidebar?
Sure. I now can actually tell you when I think you'll get the case. I can't tell you for sure, but I can tell you that you will be a deliberating jury on this case either Thursday of this week or Friday of this week. So you'll get the case this week for your deliberations. I expect I'll have a better sense whether it'll be Thursday or Friday by the end of the day tomorrow. And keep in mind what I told you during the impanelment, which is once you're a deliberating jury, You deliberate until you've reached a verdict. If you haven't reached a verdict by 4 o'clock on any given day, you're released until the next day to continue your deliberations. So we're coming down the home stretch, and you've all been working to the best of your ability very hard. It's obvious how conscientious you've been. I know that you'll continue to comport yourself as you would expect people in the important position you're now in to do so, and to make sure that nobody at any point in time tries to talk about the case with you. And if you see or hear anything, television, radio, or newspaper in your peripheral vision, please immediately divert your attention from it so that you can go into these deliberations with integrity as the sole and exclusive judges of the facts of the case. All right, jurors are excused until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
All rise. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons having anything further to do before the Honorable David Lowy, Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting at Salem, within and for this county of Essex at present, depart and give your attendance at this place Tuesday morning next at 9 a.m., to which time and place the sitting of this court is now adjourned. Juror, duly noted.
Yeah.
Court will remain in session. You may be seated.
Okay, counsel. I'll hear on any outstanding issues, and then we'll not do a charge conference, but a preparation for a charge conference at 2 o'clock. Ms. Oker, why don't you address the issues that you had, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. The first issue is the motion to admit the evidence relating to the consequences of a verdict as not criminally responsible. That is the proposed testimony of the superintendent of Bridgewater State Hospital concerning the conditions of confinement were the defendant to be ordered there. I would propose to admit the testimony of Daniel Kalis. He is now the superintendent of Bridgewater State Hospital, based both on, the language and case law going all the way back to Mutina, but most recently reiterated and reinforced in Chappelle as to the importance to the jury's understanding of what the consequences of such a verdict would be. And I know that there's been conversation previously in this case about whether or not commitment to Bridgewater State Hospital is a real possibility for Philip Chism, given his age. And I can't definitively resolve that issue. What I can say is that based on what Deborah Pinel said on the record to the court, and my conversation with Attorney Philip Silva with the Department of Corrections at Bridgewater State Hospital, the position of the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Corrections is that were the court, of course were the court to order him there, that they would accept him there, though no one has any memory of a 16-year-old being at Bridgewater. Nonetheless, they would accept him and one-on-one staff him to deal with the problem of PREA, the federal statute requiring that individuals under the age of 18 be kept separate from individuals over the age of 18 in a prison environment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McFiddler?
First of all, as a general matter, Your Honor, I would just suggest that the court has spoken very recently on this issue in Chappelle. The Commonwealth is certainly would be asking for and assumes the court will give the instruction in Chappelle. What the cases have made clear is that while it is certainly something appropriate for the court to instruct on, it is not something appropriate for counsel to argue. And by the same token, I would suggest to present evidence is inappropriate. Additionally, in this particular case, as Ms. Oker has just noted, it is far from clear that the defendant would go to Bridgewater, and if this evidence were to be admitted, the Commonwealth would want to admit evidence that it's far more likely he would go to Worcester Recovery, and that there are real concerns about the level of security at Worcester Recovery that have been raised on multiple occasions in this case by the Commonwealth. So, frankly, it's a can of worms. And I just think the court has, where the SJC has literally spoken on this issue mid-trial, we should do what they told us and nothing more.
All right, thank you. I think the whole point of the instruction is to make sure that the jury doesn't think that somebody who's found not to be criminally responsible somehow walks out the door. And the new instruction from Chappelle emphasizes that this commitment can actually turn into a lifetime commitment. And the purpose of that is so that jurors don't misunderstand the implications. But at the same time that that is the case, and the instruction exists for that reason, jurors are also told that they cannot make any decision based on the consequences of their deliberations. They can't take into account any potential punishment or the consequences of their deliberations. It's more informational. Now, in Chappelle, the language previously in place has been made even stronger, and I think that it's not just a concern about what the rebuttal would be, but it would confuse the jury into thinking that this is really something that they should be discussing and considering as a matter of evidence. That's not the point. The point is that they're not supposed to be considering it. So the request to have the superintendent of Bridgewater testify is denied.
No, my objection, please.
Sure. All right, what else do we have?
There were two pieces of evidence that were taken to Baining on, I believe it was a week ago today. The photograph of Philip Chism and the records, psychiatric records of his maternal grandmother and maternal aunt, Joyce Barbieri and Michelle Barbieri. So those are loose ends in the evidence.
Okay, so if I understood the Commonwealth's position, the psych records from the maternal grandmother and maternal great-aunt or aunt?
It's aunt.
Aunt. That the Commonwealth was going to review that to see if there was anything that you wished stricken, and they were admitted to Bene, I think. Is that right?
I think so.
If we could just have till the morning, Your Honor, we're in the process of doing that. I can tell the court off the top of my head, I know there were some references to his grandmother suffering renewed depression from the fact that her mentally ill grandson was facing charges of rape and murder. Needless to say, the Commonwealth thinks that should be redacted. But I don't know that we have the same extent of objections as we did. We certainly agree that the bulk of them should come in.
Right, so what I'll do is once you've got the Commonwealth's objections, I'll get a list of pages from counsel, please, and go over those. All right. And then the photograph, your position, I assume, is that we've got testimony relative to what age there was an onset from Dr. Dudley, and we have testimony concerning the relationship with the sisters, and that you believe, therefore, the relevance is, even though you would have argued it was relevant before, but that the relevance has changed.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. McDougall, I'll hear you on that.
Your Honor, whatever minimal relevance there is and minimal probative value there is, there's undue prejudice to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth was provided with a series of pictures of Mr. Chism, frankly some which look far closer in age to the time of the crime and don't include his very cute little sisters. There is only one reason that that photograph is going in. Frankly, I'm not at all clear how old he is in that photograph based on the testimony as well as based on the other photographs we have, some of which are dated and time-stamped, in which he looks substantially younger than those photographs, which are dated 2007, 2008. So I just don't think the foundation's been laid, and the sole purpose for that photograph is to make the defendant seem sympathetic.
All right. Well, if there's a photograph that shows the defendant by himself in the period of time in which he moved from Tennessee, I would allow that. The photograph, for the purposes of this case, doesn't add anything to the testimony from Dr. Dudley of onset at 10. But if there's a photograph that shows the defendant in differently than in the videos, or as he's seen by the jury today, in the period of time when he moved, or around that period of time, I'd allow that in evidence. Okay, so your objection's noted to that, Ms. Oker. Okay, yes.
There is an issue of the records from the Department of Youth Services that concern Philip Chism's medication, and that in fact, after he was discharged on approximately November 4th, 2015 from Worcester Recovery Center, that he has continued to take the medication, the risperidone. The reason that this is relevant, and the court should admit it, is that the Commonwealth opened the door to this with its question about whether on his last day, November 4th at Worcester Recovery Center, if he refused the risperidone. I realize that the court, or that the Commonwealth said that that was relevant because he wanted to be in worse shape when he came back to court so he could be incompetent. I think that's what was said at sidebar. But there is a fair inference the jury could make, is that he stopped taking the medication because he didn't think he needed it, or because he didn't think he needed it and because it wasn't helping him. And it contributes to their argument that he's a malingerer. Anyway, here are the records, and it shows he refused the medication on a couple of occasions. The second reason why this is relevant is because the jury is going to look at Philip Chism and how he appears in court, and that he appears in his present state. And they have a right to know that he is on medication and that he's presently on medication. So I would move to admit these records. I can submit them to the judge, the court.
All right. Well, the evidence cuts both ways, but if there's objections to issues in the records because it's broader than its purpose, then certainly perhaps there could be a stipulation that he's been taking it since and missed a couple days. I'm not sure. That's a strategic choice from the defendant whether you want to put that evidence in. But do you have any objection to the records, Ms. McDougall?
I do, Your Honor. I agreed with Ms. Oker that I wouldn't require a keeper from DYS, so I'm not making any objection on that front. But again, I just don't see what the relevance is of whether he's been taking Risperdal, and particularly since we're not going to get into that even on the Risperdal, we had our little episode on day 2 of trial. So what's the value of whether or not he's on Risperdal?
Well, I think it's I'm not interested in engaging in the craft of advocacy of the defendant, but there's certainly an argument that helps the Commonwealth that he's taking it all these other days and doesn't take it on that particular day. But the defendant wants to put in evidence that he didn't take it that day, but he took it other days.
Well, and then apparently they want to argue that it explains his behavior in court, which is exactly the same as it's been for long before he was on the Risperdal, except for the days that he engaged in other behavior in lockup.
Yeah, no,
So there's no, I mean, my concern, I understand the court doesn't want to get involved in the craft of advocacy, but given openings and given everything else, I'm very concerned about how this evidence is going to be argued in closing.
I'm not going to argue it in closing.
Yeah, no, so
I'm not going to, let me be really clear since I need to be. I am not going to mention Philip Chism's appearance in court and its relationship to the antipsychotic medication in my closing.
Yeah, no, the relevance of this is pretty straightforward. If counsel wants to enter into a stipulation, considering I'm going to allow the evidence in for the limited purpose that to rehabilitate the cross, again, I'm not sure that it does, but it might do the opposite, but that's a craft of advocacy determination. If if there's no stipulation, then I'll admit it de bene, subject to request for redactions. If there's a stipulation, I'll consider it tomorrow. But the evidence is, there's, I wouldn't consider that the jury would use the evidence for the purpose that the Commonwealth is concerned about without expert testimony, but since it's not going to be argued in closing, I don't really have to worry about that. This is simply a response to the cross-examination of not taking the medication on November 4th as it relates to raising malingering issues. So that can be admitted de bene. Okay. Now,
put on the record, for given all of the issues, I know the court had other substantive reasons for sustaining my objections to Dr. Dvir talking about the value of brain scans. I would just note it's also not included in the notice of her testimony.
all right, so anything else before we do? There was an indication at the sidebar that the defendant wanted to be excused at 2 o'clock. If that's the case, let's do whatever else we can first. Is there anything else, Ms. Regan?
Yes, well, as regards tomorrow, there's a motion in limine involving Dr. Heben's testimony.
Yeah, this is the Albert Lanigan challenge. Is that the one I read?
Well, that I was actually referring to, it's more limited. The motion in limine concerning Dr. Heben, and it also applies to Dr. Casey. I didn't realize when I drafted it that Dr. Casey would be testifying at all. But that's okay. I'm not complaining about that. Dr. Heben and Dr. Casey were permitted access to Philip Chism to do psychological testing to inform Dr. Kincherf. And the defendant agreed that they could do psychological testing. However, in the reports that were provided, the contact between Dr. Heben and Dr. Casey and Mr. Chism went broader than that. And in fact, Mr. Chism was interviewed by Dr. Heben and by Dr. Casey. And I would move to exclude that as beyond the scope of the court order and violation of the 14b2, which allows the Commonwealth one evaluator, not two. Now, certainly, Dr. Heben and Dr. Casey would be able to testify about observations they made of Mr. Chism during the psychological testing, because that's all part and parcel. That's not what I'm objecting to. What I'm objecting to is any information obtained by Mr. Chism in an interview prior to the psychological testing.
Okay, but maybe I'm misunderstanding, but the Commonwealth's interest in this must be to explain the testing and explain how Dr. Casey and Dr. Eben got to where they did in their conclusions, and not as it relates to the testing. I mean, Ms. Regan, I don't disagree with what you've said, and it seems to me that that's clearly right, but I can't imagine the Commonwealth is asking questions other than questions so that the testing makes sense. You need background for the testing to make sense. Did you want to ask questions beyond that? I mean, observations and so that the testing makes sense as to how it works?
No, and I'm a little confused, to be honest, because I can't elicit statements of the defendant on direct examination of anyone anyway, and I didn't intend to elicit them from either Dr. Heben or Dr. Casey. The only interviews they conducted were the sort of baseline conversation they need to have with the defendant for purposes of the testing.
Right.
I don't expect to elicit from either of them an opinion or a diagnosis, except to testify to the testing they did, which is the basis of, so that I can admit the testing so that it can then be a proper basis for Dr. Kincherf's opinion.
All right. I assume that eliminates the problem, and because I don't know how they'd be able to get to their data and what it means without some not reference to what the answers to any questions were, but did you have a conversation before? Did you explain it? That's all. They can't get another opinion in under 14b2, and I assume that solves the issue, unless the defendant decides to raise something on cross, obviously. Okay, good. Anything else before I do a colloquy and do a recess? How about you, Ms. McDougall? Okay. Yeah, please.
Mr. Chism, would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear you'll make true answers to such questions that may be put to you by the court or upon instruction, so help you God?
Can you give this to Mr. Osler? Yes. So, Mr. Chism, I'm going to ask you some questions so I can make sure your decision to give up your right to be present this afternoon is being made knowingly of your own free will and voluntarily. As in every other instance, I am never, through my questions, trying to suggest to you what you should do. That's your decision after having enough time to talk with your lawyers. So don't misunderstand what I'm going to say now is trying to talk you into staying or not staying. But the conversation this afternoon is different than conversation about whether a witness is going to testify or not testify. The conversation this afternoon is about how the court is going to instruct the jury on the law. In other words, that's a much bigger deal than the other times that you requested not to be present. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And do you understand, sir, that you, if you choose not to be present, you could also be able to hear this afternoon's testimony and, not testimony, excuse me, discussions of law from the lockup area as well. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And while we talked about other times participating in the trial process when we were having discussions of law and evidence issues, you also have an opportunity to participate and understand in order to assist counsel on your thoughts on closing arguments and any other issues, to be present during any charge conference or even the informal preliminary charge conference that the court's going to have this afternoon. In other words, this is an important thing that's going to happen this afternoon, and you have a right to be here not just to see it, but to talk to your lawyers about it. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And have you had enough time to, did you speak to Mr. Osler about this, sir?
Yes.
Okay, have you had enough time to talk to him about it?
Yes.
And if you wish not to be present for this afternoon, or do you wish to be present?
Not to be present.
Okay, and are you making this decision knowingly of your own free will and voluntarily?
Yes.
Have I asked you anything at all that's confused you, sir?
No.
Okay. And I know I've already gone over this before, but you understand this is a different type of discussion than when you've requested not to be here before.
Yes.
All right. I find the decision to waive presence, which is the defendant's right, is being made knowingly, freely, and voluntarily upon the advice of competent, qualified, and prepared counsel, and the request is accepted. All right, we'll be in recess until 2 o'clock then.
All rise.